The cold floor was the first thing Rick felt when he opened his eyes. Metal. Hard. The air smelled like rust and smoke. He tried to move, but his muscles were weak. Slowly, he sat up, his back pressing against the freezing wall behind him. His vision was blurry at first, but as it cleared, he saw the dark, square-shaped cell that surrounded him. He was alone. Rick was a soldier from Earth. He had been part of a peace patrol, watching the borders near the alien-controlled zones. Everything had been quiet until their ship was attacked. It happened fast. Bright flashes of energy, a boarding party, and then silence. His last memory was a sharp pain to the back of his head and falling to the floor. Now he was here, in a prison made by aliens. The cell had no bed, no window, no light except a small red glow coming from above. He didn't know where he was or even how long he had been unconscious. His arms were bruised and his uniform was torn. He touched his side. At least no bones were broken. A loud metal sound echoed through the corridor. Rick moved closer to the bars. Across from his cell, a tall creature with green skin and armor walked past. It looked like a guard. Its eyes were cold and silver, like it didn't care about anything at all. Rick tried to speak. "Hey, what is this place?" The guard didn't stop. It didn't even look at him. It just kept walking down the corridor. Minutes passed. Then hours. Rick didn't know the time. He called out again, but nobody answered. The walls were thick, and the silence around him felt heavier than the steel bars. Later, he heard footsteps again. But this time, it wasn't a guard. He noticed movement in the cell across from his in the far corner. Someone or something was sitting there half in the shadows. It was a woman. Not human. Her skin had a soft blue glow, but not too bright. Her hair was long and tied back. She had small elf-like ears and sharp eyes that studied him from the dark. She was sitting quietly with her knees close to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. Rick blinked. "You're alive?" She tilted her head slightly but said nothing. For a few seconds, they just looked at each other. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm and smooth. "You're new." Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah. Got here? I don't know when." The woman looked away. "Time doesn't matter here. You'll forget soon." Rick frowned. "Where are we? Who are they?" "They are jailers. This is the Deep Zone prison," she said. "It's where they send the unwanted. Those who don't obey." Rick leaned back against the wall. "What about you?" The woman didn't answer. Not at first. Then she whispered, "I helped someone they didn't want me to help. That's enough to get locked up here." Rick felt a chill. He had heard of alien prisons, but this one felt different. It felt like a place people were meant to disappear. He stood up and walked closer to the bars. "I'm Rick. Soldier. Earth." She looked at him again. "Sarah," she said simply. They stayed silent for a while. Other cells were nearby, but most were empty. A few held quiet, strange-looking aliens, some with scales, others with extra arms or metal limbs. No one spoke. No one moved. Only Rick and Sarah had the strength or reason to talk. Rick sat down again, exhausted. "They didn't even ask me anything, just threw me in." "That's what they do," Sarah replied. "They don't need reasons." Rick let out a breath. "My people don't even know I'm here. They never will." Rick looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "This prison is hidden in the black zones. No communication, no signals go in or out. No rescues, no one escapes." Rick clenched his fists. "There's always a way out." Sarah gave a soft smile, not of hope, but of pity. "They all say that at first." But Rick's eyes stayed sharp. He wasn't ready to give up. He had survived battles before. He wasn't going to rot here. That night, when the lights dimmed and silence returned, Rick stayed awake. He watched the hallway. He listened for any strange sound, And from time to time, he looked across to Sarah, who watched him back. Maybe he was alone on this alien world. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't just another prisoner. Rick woke up to the sound of heavy boots and mechanical wheels scraping against the metal floor. A food cart was being pushed down the hall by one of the guards, another tall creature with hard skin like stone and glowing red eyes. It stopped near Rick's cell and dropped a metal tray through a slot. The food looked like gray paste with no smell. Across the hall, the same thing happened for Sarah. She didn't even look at her tray. Rick picked up his spoon and poked at the paste. "What is this supposed to be?" Sarah's voice came softly from her dark cell. "It won't kill you. That's the best I can say." Rick gave a half smile and tried a bite. It tasted like nothing, dry and soft like chewing rubber. He forced himself to eat anyway. He knew a soldier needed strength, even in a place like this. When he was done, he looked across the hallway. "You're not eating?" "I'm used to hunger," Sarah replied. Her tone was calm, but there was something sad behind her voice. Rick tilted his head. "You don't talk much, do you?" Sarah leaned her head against the wall. "Talking gets you noticed. Getting noticed gets you punished." Rick stood and moved closer to the bars. "Still, it's better than going crazy in silence." She slowly raised her eyes to him. "You're different." He gave a small laugh. "I've heard that before. Usually right before a mission goes wrong." There was silence again, but this time it wasn't cold. It was quiet, but not empty. Something had shifted between them. Not trust yet, but something close to it. Rick wiped his face with the sleeve of his uniform. "How long have you been here?" "I stopped counting," Sarah replied. "Do you have family?" She hesitated. "Not anymore. My people exiled me, before the prison did." Rick looked surprised. "Why? What did you do?" "I saved a human," she said. Rick blinked. "You did what?" Sarah nodded. "Many cycles ago, I was part of a science fleet. We found a damaged human escape pod. I gave him aid. My superior said I broke protocol. They feared what kindness might bring." Rick shook his head. "That's insane." To them, it was betrayal. Rick leaned against the bars. "So you've helped someone like me before?" "Yes," Sarah said. "But he didn't survive. He was too far gone." "I'm not," Rick said firmly. Sarah looked at him closely. "No, you still carry fire." He looked confused. "Fire?" She nodded. "Your will. Your fight. It's rare here." A loud alarm buzzed through the prison suddenly. The lights flickered and loud stomping began echoing through the walls. Rick backed away from the bars. "What's going on?" Sarah was already standing. Her eyes were sharp. "Someone tried something. They'll make an example of them." Moments later, a group of guards dragged a prisoner through the corridor. The alien was bruised and bleeding. They threw him against the wall, shocking him with an electric stick. Then they shouted in a strange language and dragged him away again. Rick watched with anger. "Monsters!" Sarah sat back down. "Don't show your anger. They look for it. They enjoy it." Rick breathed deeply and controlled himself. "They can't keep doing this forever." Sarah looked up at him. "No one escapes from here. Hope is dangerous." "I'm not ready to give up hope," Rick replied. Sarah's voice softened. "Then you may need help." Rick looked at her. "Yours?" She didn't smile, but she didn't say no either. Later that night, the hallway was quiet again. Rick sat in the corner of his cell looking at the ceiling. He remembered Earth, the stars, the grass, the taste of real food, the sound of birds. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he heard a small noise, like something sliding across the floor. He opened his eyes. A small stone had rolled into his cell. It had markings scratched onto it. Rick picked it up and turned it around in his hand. The symbols were strange, but something about the pattern looked like a map. He looked across the hallway. Sarah was sitting with her head down. She didn't move. Rick held the stone tightly. Something had changed. He wasn't just a prisoner. Anymore, he had a direction, he had a chance, and maybe, just maybe, he had an ally. Rick sat with his back against the wall, staring at the strange stone in his hand. Its rough surface held tiny scratches. Some looked like lines, arrows, and dots. It wasn't random. It was a map. He just didn't know where it led yet. He looked across the hallway. Sarah still sat in her corner, silent, like nothing had happened. But Rick knew. She had sent the stone. Somehow she was testing him. He whispered, "What is this?" Sarah didn't answer right away. After a long pause, she said, "A possibility, nothing more." Rick leaned closer to the bars. "A way out?" "A path," she replied. "Not a safe one, not a sure one. But it's real." Rick's heart started beating faster. He hadn't felt hope in days, not until now. "Where does it lead?" Sarah finally looked at him. Her eyes held a quiet strength. "To the old tunnels, beneath the prison. They were part of the original structure before the guards took over. Why hasn't anyone used them?" "They're dangerous," Sarah said. "The guards don't go there, but something else does." Rick frowned. "What do you mean?" "There are creatures," she said. "Not guards, not prisoners. Experiments. Left behind." Rick swallowed hard. "And you've been down there?" "Once," she said. "Long ago." "Did you escape?" "I came back." Rick didn't know what surprised him more, that she had survived, the tunnels, or that she had chosen to return. "Why?" "There was someone I had to protect," she said softly. "They didn't make it." Rick fell silent. This woman, this alien named Sarah, was more than just a prisoner. She had risked herself for others before, and now she was offering him a way to do the same. He nodded slowly. "I'll take the chance." Sarah tilted her head. "You'll need help." Rick raised an eyebrow. "From you?" "And one more," she replied. "There's someone 2 cells down. He's quiet, but useful. He knows the lower levels better than I do." Rick waited until the next feeding cycle. When the guard passed, Rick watched carefully. 2 cells down, he noticed a figure, small, covered in scars, with robotic arms. The alien never spoke, never moved, just stared at the floor. Rick whispered to Sarah, "You trust him?" "He owes me," she replied. Later that night, Sarah called out softly in a language Rick didn't understand. The figure 2 cells down looked up. Then, without a word, the alien reached under his sleeping mat and pulled out something hidden, a piece of metal shaped like a key. Rick leaned closer. "That's for the cell door?" "No," Sarah replied. "It opens the floor vent." Rick looked down. In the corner of his cell, just beside the waste hole, was a rusty panel. He hadn't paid much attention to it before. As the lights dimmed, Sarah whispered instructions. 3 turns to the left, 1 to the right. Then pull. Rick did as told. The metal plate moved slightly, then popped open. Beneath it, a dark, narrow tunnel stretched into blackness. A foul smell hit his nose, damp, moldy, and old. But to Rick, it smelled like freedom. He looked back up at Sarah. "How do I fit through?" "You'll have to crawl," she said. "It's tight but possible." Rick pulled the cover back into place and sat down. He needed time, a plan, supplies, and most of all, timing. The next day, the guards were more aggressive. They pulled Rick from his cell and threw him into a training room. A cruel game. They made him fight another prisoner just for entertainment. Rick fought hard. He didn't want to, but he had no choice. He used his training, but held back just enough to avoid killing. After the fight, they beat him anyway. Bloody and bruised, he was thrown back into his cell. He barely managed to sit upright. Across the hall, Sarah watched. "You did well," she said quietly. Rick winced. Didn't feel like it. You're alive, she said. That's the first step. Rick looked down at his hands, shaking from pain and exhaustion, but he was still alive, still breathing. And now, he had something the guards didn't know about. That night, Sarah passed another item through the bars, a small cloth bag with pieces of dried root. For pain, she said. Chew slowly. Rick did as she told him. The taste was bitter, but his pain eased. His mind became clearer. He looked at the tunnel door in the floor again. Soon it would be time. He wasn't just planning escape. He was starting a rebellion with an alien woman who had once risked her life for a human. And now she was risking it again. The prison was quieter than usual. Something had changed in the air. Rick felt it. The guards walked slower, their eyes sharper, as if they knew something was brewing. But they didn't know the details. Not yet. Rick sat cross-legged on the cold floor, staring at the hidden tunnel in the corner. Every part of his body still ached from the forced fight. His ribs were bruised, his shoulder was sore, and his face had a cut that wouldn't stop bleeding. But his mind was focused. He couldn't afford to break. Sarah watched him from across the hall. She didn't speak for a while. Then she said softly, "You're getting stronger." Rick gave a weak smile. "I feel like I'm falling apart." "Only on the outside," she replied. "Inside, you're burning brighter." Rick raised an eyebrow. "That's poetic." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "My people believe fire lives in the heart. Those who still burn can never be controlled." Rick looked at her. "Then what about you? You still have fire?" "I lost it once," she said, "but it's returning." They didn't say more, but the silence between them was no longer cold. It was full of understanding. That night, trouble came. A large prisoner, a thick-skinned alien with 4 arms, tried to take food from Sarah. When she refused, he became violent. The guards did nothing. They only watched. Rick saw it happening and stood up quickly. "Hey," he shouted, slamming his fists on the bars. "Leave her alone!" The other prisoners looked up, but no one helped. The brute reached through Sarah's bars, grabbing her arm roughly. She didn't cry out, but her eyes closed in pain. Rick didn't think. He acted. He grabbed his metal food tray and started banging it loudly against the cell door. "Come on, you coward. Try me instead." The brute turned toward him, growling in his language. Rick kept shouting. The guards finally stepped in, not to protect Sarah, but to stop the noise. They entered the hallway and pulled the brute away, shocking him with a rod. The prisoner growled in pain but backed off. A guard slammed his stick against Rick's bars. "Silence, human." Rick didn't reply. He stared straight ahead, breathing hard. His fists were clenched, but his eyes were steady. The guards walked away. The hallway returned to silence. Sarah sat on the floor, holding her arm. Her breathing was shallow. Rick leaned forward. "Are you all right?" She nodded slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Rick said. "No one else was going to." Sarah looked at him, and for the first time her eyes were warm. "You risked yourself. You would have done the same," Rick replied. She gave a small smile. "I already did. I gave you the map." Rick smiled back. "Then I guess we're even." That night, after the lights dimmed, Sarah tossed something toward him. It landed near his feet. He picked it up, a piece of broken wire bent like a hook. "For the vent," she said. "You'll need to unlock it from the inside. Guards don't check it often." Rick nodded. "Thanks." "You're not alone anymore," she added. Rick felt something shift in his chest. In this dark place, among enemies and monsters, someone believed in him. He chewed on another piece of the pain relief root and checked his hidden bag. He had saved a small piece of dry cloth, a sharp rock, and now a hook. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a start. Later, Sarah whispered, "We must move soon. The guards will rotate in 2 nights. That's our best chance." "What about the one 2 cells down?" Rick asked. "The one with the metal arms?" "He's ready. she replied. He'll meet us below the vent tunnel. Rick sighed. 3 people, in a tunnel filled with traps and creatures. 3 is better than 1, Sarah said, and better than none. Rick lay back on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts drifted to Earth. Would anyone know where he went? Would anyone search for him? Maybe not. But maybe if he survived, if he got out, he could return and tell them. Not just about the prison, but about her, about courage and trust and fire. For now, he didn't know the end of the story, but the next chapter was coming fast, and it would begin underground. The night was thick with silence. Even the guard's boots seemed quieter than usual. Rick stayed near the corner of his cell, staring at the vent cover in the floor. It was almost time. Across from him, Sarah nodded once. Rick waited until the second patrol passed. Then he knelt down, took out the hook she had given him and pushed it into the tiny lock under the cover. It clicked. He pulled it up slowly. The vent creaked, but not enough to draw attention. Darkness greeted him below, a narrow tunnel of rusted metal, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Rick whispered, "Here goes nothing." He slid into the hole feet first. It was tight. The walls scratched his shoulders as he moved. The air smelled of dust, mold, and something worse, like old blood. But he didn't stop. Sarah dropped down after him a minute later. Her movement was smooth and quiet. Behind them, the third figure followed. The metal-armed alien moved silently, like he had done this before. Rick had never heard him speak, but he felt no fear from the creature. Only focus. The tunnel led them forward, twisting left and right. Pipes ran along the walls, leaking strange fluids. The metal groaned above, echoing the sound of their movement. Suddenly, the quiet was broken. A strange sound echoed from deep ahead, like breathing, not human, not mechanical, wet, heavy. Rick froze. "What was that?" Sarah whispered. "One of them." Rick held his breath. A shape moved in the shadows ahead. A low growl followed. Then silence again. The metal-armed alien tapped the wall 3 times and pointed to a side vent. "We hide?" Rick asked. Sarah nodded. "Quickly." They crawled into the side space just in time. A creature slithered past the main tunnel, its body long with thick gray skin and many legs. It had no eyes, just gills and teeth. It sniffed the air, paused, then moved on. Rick's heart pounded. "What are those things?" "Failed experiments," Sarah whispered. "They feed on sound." "On movement," Rick wiped sweat from his face. "Let's keep going." They returned to the tunnel and moved fast but carefully. After what felt like an hour, they reached a broken section of wall with an old control panel. The panel was cracked, but still had a working screen. It glowed faintly. Sarah reached for it and entered a code. "How do you know this stuff?" Rick asked. "My family built parts of the old prison long ago," she said. "I remember stories, and I remember symbols." The wall clicked open, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. It was round, made of stone and metal. Inside were crates, tools, and what looked like old storage units. A small light flickered above. "This was an old maintenance station," Sarah explained, "before they turned this place into a prison." Rick walked over to a metal table and found a small pack of tools. "This could help." The metal-armed alien took a long knife from one of the crates and attached it to his arm. Rick nodded to him. "Good thinking." But before they could rest, another sound came from the tunnel. Behind them, a scream, not human, not from one of them, but filled with rage. "They followed us," Rick said. Sarah looked at the back wall. "There's a second tunnel, smaller, harder to pass." "Let's move," Rick said. They escaped through the narrow path. This tunnel was older, dirt mixed with stone. It was hard to crawl, but the creatures couldn't follow as easily. Rick scraped his knees and elbows but kept going. Then disaster. The tunnel floor gave way under Sarah. She screamed and fell down a pit. Rick didn't think. He grabbed the edge and looked down. She was lying on a rocky ledge a few feet below. "Hurt but alive, Sarah." "I'm fine," she said, though her leg was bleeding. "Keep going." "No," Rick said. He turned to the metal-armed alien. "Help me." Together they lowered a wire down. Rick climbed into the hole and reached her. He helped tie the wire to her waist and nodded to the other alien, who pulled them both up slowly. When Sarah was safe, Rick sat beside her. "You saved me," she said quietly. "You saved me first," Rick replied. They looked at each other. No more fear, only trust. The tunnel behind them rumbled. "We need to move," Rick said. "No more delays." Sarah stood leaning on him. Together, with their silent companion, they walked deeper into the unknown, toward freedom, danger, and a future none of them could see yet. But Rick knew one thing. He wasn't alone anymore. The narrow tunnel opened into a dark chamber, larger than any space they had passed through. Thick cables hung from the ceiling. Broken screens and machines lay in the dust, unused for many years. A strange silence filled the place, but it wasn't the same kind of silence from the prison. It was peaceful. Rick helped Sarah sit on a metal crate. Her leg was still bleeding from the fall, but she didn't complain. She just pressed a torn cloth against the wound and breathed slowly. The metal-armed alien stood guard near the entrance, his sharp eyes watching every shadow. Rick walked around, scanning the room. "What is this place?" Sarah looked up. "An old control center. Before this planet became a prison, it was a research station. Some systems may still work." Rick nodded and checked a dusty console. After brushing off the dirt, he found a small screen that still had power. The text was in an alien language, but Sarah came over and read it. "Ventilation, power grid, emergency exit. Yes, this is it." Rick leaned closer. "Emergency exit?" She nodded. "If we're lucky, it might lead to the surface." Rick smiled slightly. "I like the sound of fresh air." But then he remembered, this wasn't Earth. Even the air on this planet might be poison. "Can we breathe up there?" "Yes," Sarah said. "This planet has oxygen. That's why so many species are kept here. Easy for the jailers to control." Rick looked back at her leg. "You won't make it far, like that." She met his eyes. "I'll make it. You've done too much for me. I won't slow you down now." He shook his head. "You're not slowing me down. You're the reason I got this far." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, the metal-armed alien tapped the side panel and pointed to a round hatch in the floor. "It's locked," Rick said. Sarah limped over and studied the panel. She took out a small device from her belt. "Old access tool," she explained. "If this works, we'll have one chance." She connected it to the panel. Sparks flew. A loud beep echoed in the room. The hatch hissed, then opened slowly. A long, vertical shaft stretched downward with a rusted ladder on the side. Rick peered down. "This goes deeper, not higher." Sarah checked the control screen again. "There's a lift at the bottom, an old cargo elevator. If it works, it'll take us to the surface." Rick looked at her. "If it works?" She smiled weakly. "Do you ever stop asking questions?" He laughed. "Only when I'm sleeping." They began to descend the ladder carefully. Rick went first, helping guide Sarah step by step. The metal-armed alien followed behind, silent as always. After several long minutes, they reached the bottom. The air was heavier here. The lights flickered, but the elevator door was visible. Rick pulled it open. Inside was a square lift, big enough for cargo or a few people. He checked the controls. "Power's still active, just barely." Sarah stepped in. "Do it." Rick pressed the button. The lift groaned loudly, but began to rise. Every sound made Rick nervous. At any second he expected alarms, guards, or worse. But the lift kept moving. Higher and higher. Until light. Natural light. Faint but real. The lift stopped with a final shake. The door opened. Rick stepped out first, blinking. They were in a ruined building. The walls were broken, vines growing through the cracks. Above them, through the shattered ceiling, stars filled the sky. He took a deep breath. The air was cool and fresh. Sarah stepped beside him, her eyes wide. This was once a city, she whispered. Before the prison came. The metal-armed alien scanned the area and nodded. Rick walked outside the building. The landscape was quiet. Hills, trees, and distant mountains under the moonlight. No walls, no guards. Just freedom. He turned to Sarah. "We made it," she smiled. "We're not done yet," Rick raised a brow. "There's more," she pointed to the horizon. "We need a ship. There's an old hangar north of here. If it's still there, we can get off this planet." Rick looked at the stars above. Somewhere out there, Earth was waiting. But right here, beside him, was someone who had changed his life. "We go together," Rick said. Sarah nodded. Together. The wind blew gently through the ruins. The prison was behind them. The future was ahead, and for the first time in a long while, Rick felt truly alive. The journey toward the hangar was long and quiet. Rick, Sarah, and the metal-armed alien moved through the ruins, keeping low to avoid any danger. The landscape around them had once been a city, tall, grand structures now crumbling and overgrown, with plants. It was a strange kind of beauty, this place left behind, forgotten by those who had once lived here. Rick glanced at Sarah as they walked. She had been quiet for a while, her steps slow and steady, but he could see the pain in her eyes. Her legs still bothered her, but she didn't complain. She never did. They both knew what it meant to survive. The metal-armed alien walked ahead, scanning the area with sharp eyes. He had no name, but he had become a trusted ally. Rick didn't need to know much about him. His actions spoke louder than words. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the ruined city. They came to a large hill, and at the top, they saw it, a long abandoned hangar in the distance. The structure was large, covered in vines and dust, but it stood tall, a forgotten relic of the past. "That's it," Sarah said, her voice full of determination. Rick nodded. "Let's move quickly. No telling what's inside." They approached the hangar cautiously, scanning for any signs of life. The wind rustled the leaves, and the only sounds were the faint creaks of the broken buildings around them. The door to the hangar was partially open, enough to slip through but still heavy and old. Rick pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the air was stale, and the darkness was thick. The hangar was vast, filled with old machinery, broken crates, and rusted vehicles. It smelled like metal and dust, but there was something else, something familiar. He stepped inside, followed by Sarah and their silent companion. Sarah's eyes quickly moved to the far corner of the room. "Over there," she said, pointing to a large, covered shape. Rick moved toward it, feeling a rush of excitement. He lifted the cloth covering and uncovered an old ship. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The ship had been abandoned for years, but it was still intact. The engines were old, but they might still work. The hull was scratched but solid. It wasn't perfect, but it was their ticket out of here. "This is it," Rick said. "It'll have to do." Sarah smiled, a rare and tired smile. "It's more than I expected." They moved to the control panel, checking the systems. Rick worked quickly, scanning for power, fuel, and any other signs of life. The ship's interior was dusty, but it looked like it had been maintained. The control panel was still active, though the screen flickered. "It's alive," Rick muttered, tapping a few buttons. "We might be able to get this working." Sarah stepped closer, her eyes scanning the panel. "We don't have much time. If they realize we've escaped, they'll send everything they've got," Rick finished. "I know." He worked faster now, turning switches, flipping levers, and tapping buttons. His mind raced as he tried to remember every detail of his training. A ship was a ship, no matter the species. The basics were the same. As long as the engines were still functional, they could fly. Finally, a low hum filled the room, The lights flickered on and the ship's systems began to power up. Rick's heart pounded with excitement. It's working. Sarah let out a breath of relief. We're really doing this. The metal-armed alien moved to the back of the ship, checking for anything that could be useful. He came back holding a small case. He handed it to Rick, who opened it to find several weapons. Nothing fancy, but enough to defend themselves if needed. We won't need these if we're quick, Rick said, setting the weapons aside. We get in, we fly out, and we don't stop until we're far away. Sarah nodded. Agreed. Rick climbed into the cockpit and began preparing for takeoff. The ship was cramped, but it had everything they needed. As he flipped switches, Sarah sat next to him, her hand resting on the arm of the seat. I never thought I'd see the stars again, she said quietly. Rick smiled, his hands moving over the controls. You will. And this time, you'll be free. The ship's engines roared to life, and with a deep hum it lifted off the ground. The hangar doors slowly creaked open, revealing the open sky. Sarah looked out of the window. It's beautiful. Rick's eyes stayed on the controls, but he allowed himself a moment to enjoy the sight of the stars ahead. He had made it. They had made it. The prison was behind them and the unknown future lay ahead. Where will we go? Sarah asked. Rick glanced at her. Anywhere. Wherever the stars take us. The ship soared into the sky, cutting through the atmosphere. Rick looked back one last time at the planet below, the place that had held him prisoner. He had survived. They had all survived. And now, they were free. As the ship broke through the clouds, the darkness of space spread out before them, endless and full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, Rick felt truly free. Together, they were escaping their past, flying toward a new future where nothing could hold them back.